Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Bite number 186, dated February 16th, 2021. I'm Walter, your mobile historian and blue-collar scholar. This History Bite is entitled A Tribute to Thurgood Marshall. Most Americans have at least heard of Thurgood Marshall, and most remember him exclusively for being the first African American to serve as a member of the Supreme Court of the United States. But there is more to Thurgood Marshall than just that. He had a very distinguished legal career well before arriving at the U.S. Supreme Court. And something most Americans do not know is that Mr. Justice Marshall was a native son of Baltimore. Yes, Baltimore, Maryland. As a Baltimorean myself, that is a fact which makes me exceptionally proud, as he is one of my role models. All right, so let's dig into it and discuss a little bit more about the legendary Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was born in Baltimore, Maryland on the 2nd of July, 1908, to middle-class parents. He initially lived at 544 McMeekin Street, and then later moved to 1632 Division Street. Both of these are located in West Baltimore. The home at 544 McMeekin no longer stands, but the house at 1632 Division Street still is an active residence to this very day. Mr. Justice Marshall, as a little boy, would attend elementary school at Henry Highland Garnett, not very far from his home on Division Street. The school is long gone, but the building remains, unfortunately, in a derelict condition. He would attend high school at the legendary Frederick Douglass High School in Baltimore, a school which is still an active institution to this very day, all right? He would attend college at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, okay? And some of his classmates were names that I'm sure you've heard of, including Langston Hughes and Cab Calloway, all right? Yes, very prominent African-American men. Lincoln University was described by some as a school for light, bright black males. Of course, a play on the fact that a great many of the black men who attended the school were of a fair-skinned complexion, like Justice Marshall and Cab Calloway, all right, especially. So, but Marshall wasn't a serious student at Lincoln. As a matter of fact, he got disciplined severely by the school for playing a lot of pranks, all right? He did graduate from the institution in 1930, however, with a bachelor's degree in American literature and philosophy. Always willing to debate, having been essentially trained in that art by his father, whom he described as turning him into a lawyer at a very early age by making him defend every statement he made. Marshall embarked upon a career in the law. So he sought attendance at the University of Maryland School of Law right here in Baltimore, but was rejected on account of his race. So with that in mind, he enrolled at the much more prestigious Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C., where he graduated magna cum laude in 1933. Upon graduating from Howard, Mr. Marshall opened up a private law practice here in Baltimore, initially representing many clients for free. He soon realized that wasn't the best way to run a business and, certainly began to change his focus. In 1934, he became affiliated with the NAACP, an affiliation that would last for nearly the next 2.5 decades, all right? And with that, he argued his very first high-profile case in the case of Pearson versus Murray, all right? Murray versus Pearson, rather, which is covered in a separate video, all right? This was the landmark case decided by the Court of Appeals of Maryland that integrated the University of Maryland School of Law. If you recall, Marshall had applied to the school himself, but was denied on account of race. Marshall argued on behalf of the petitioner, Mr. Murray, that he was entitled to admission to the school because Maryland had no separate law school for blacks, and therefore, under the existing guidelines of the time, Maryland would have to provide him with a legal education, so he'd have to admit him to the all-white University of Maryland, which is what occurred in 1936. So that was Marshall's first giant legal victory, very notable one. So like I said, this was the beginning of his affiliation with the NAACP, which would last until the very early 1960s, all right? And this is what additionally represented much of Marshall's legal career. So from the late 1930s all the way into the early 1960s, Marshall represented numerous clients in criminal cases, cases involving integration in education, voting, and loads of other types of civil rights issues, okay? Some of these cases ultimately wound up at the Supreme Court of the United States, You might know a few of these cases. He argued a lot of cases before the Supreme Court, but some of the most noteworthy ones included, but were not limited to, Chambers versus Florida in 1940, Gaines versus Canada in 1938, Smith versus Allwright in 1944, Shelley versus Kramer in 1948, McLaurin versus Oklahoma State Regents, 1950, Sweat versus Painter, 1950, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. Of course, there were a lot of others, but these are the most noteworthy cases that he argued, okay? So Marshall has a long history of representing civil rights plaintiffs before the U.S. Supreme Court. For the record, Thurgood Marshall argued in his lifetime 32 cases before the Supreme Court of the United States, winning 29 of them. Not bad if I do say so myself, all right? In 1961, he was nominated by President John F. Kennedy to serve as a judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, headquartered in New York, and was confirmed by the Senate to that position. He served with distinction as a judge on the Second Circuit until 1965, when he was nominated by President Lyndon B. Johnson to be Solicitor General of the United States. All right. Marshall's nomination and confirmation to that position made him the first African American to ever serve as the U.S. Solicitor General. If you are not familiar with what that position does, the U.S. Solicitor General is the ranking official in the U.S. Justice Department responsible for advocating the federal government's position in cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. All right? Now you know what that is if you didn't know. All right? Marshall served with distinction in that role for the next 2 years until the retirement of Justice Tom Clark from the Supreme Court of the United States. At that point, President Lyndon Johnson, who arguably facilitated that retirement by appointing Justice Clark's son, Ramsey, as the Attorney General of the United States, at that point, President Johnson formally nominated Thurgood Marshall to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. All right. Needless to say, Marshall's opposition faced some resistance from Southern Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, who asked him a whole bunch of pointless questions with respect to his background and his judicial philosophy, all of which he was able to successfully navigate around. For sure, Marshall would be confirmed by the U.S. Senate to the Supreme Court by a vote of 69-11, with several senators not voting and others voting present. All right. Not a bad confirmation vote in the context of 1967. So with his nomination and confirmation, Thurgood Marshall thus became the first African American to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. Once on the Supreme Court, Marshall would serve in this capacity for the next 24 years under 3 Chief Justices, Earl Warren, Warren Burger, and William Rehnquist. Marshall's early years on the court, he was very much in harmony with his fellow liberal justices. But as the 1960s turned into the 1970s and the 1970s turned into the 1980s, Marshall was soon joined on the court by many much more conservative justices appointed by Presidents Nixon and Ford, all right, as well as Ronald Reagan and eventually George Herbert Walker Bush. All right, so Marshall spent much of the later period of his time on the court in dissent, all right, along with fellow liberal lion Justice William J. Brennan Jr. Marshall's judicial philosophy and his overall flexibility on the court is covered in a separate video. Okay, so check that out. But, you know, overwhelmingly, Marshall was a pronounced member of the United States Supreme Court, much more so in the beginning than in the end. During his time on the court, he wrote some 400 opinions, concurrences, and dissents, all right? And unfortunately, much attributed to health reasons, including the retirement of Justice William J. Brennan Jr. in 1990, Justice Marshall submitted his retirement to President Bush in 1991. You know, he hung on as long as he could, but by at that point he was 82 and definitely in failing health, all right? He would be succeeded on the court by current Justice Clarence Thomas, whom I have had the pleasure of meeting and conversing with. He's very, very good guy, all right? Justice Marshall would live for another couple of years until his passing on the 24th of January, 1993, at the age of 84, all right? So that covers and gives you a basic synopsis of my hometown hero, Justice Thurgood Marshall, and some particulars of his life before he arrived on the Supreme Court and while he served on the Supreme Court. If you have any questions or controversies, just leave them down below and I'll be happy to answer them. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, I humbly ask that you do so now. Your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks for listening to the video. If you made it this far, that means you love history. Kudos to you, all right? Take care, stay safe out there, and I'll talk to you at the next bite. Peace.